So yeah, Crystal's joining us remotely. Hey, Crystal, can you hear us? Yeah, okay. I think she.
Yes,
Hi.
I can hear you.
Okay, we're all watching you right now. Well, thank you for joining us.
No problem.
All right, so we're gonna go take a look at the quiz, go over it. All right, so the first question is write a validation that requires tasks to have a value for complete. So let's see. This one, I don't like how they formatted this. Let me look at these. Okay, that's better. So a class task extends from actor record and then validates complete presence true. So yep. Um, okay, that's one response. Okay. Then the next one validates complete presence true. Yep.
It's tied. You're right. You're right. It's tied, but it's still hanging on you, and you're gonna trip.
I'm gonna mute you for now. Oh, there we go. You mute yourself. Thanks. uh, Thanks, Crystal. Write a validation that requires, okay, validates complete presence true, same thing. And the validates complete presence true, yeah. So, I mean, that was pretty simple, right? Any questions on that? Right. So, what is validates? Like that's what we were talking about. Like, try to think in these constructs, the abstract constructs. So, validates, what programming construct is that? A method, exactly. Yeah. So here you're calling a method, and then you're passing it. What is that? Yep, or a symbol, right? The type. And then here, what's the type of this that you're passing it? Presence colon true. The whole thing, presence colon true. What is the type of that? A hash. Yep. So yeah, that's the key, and then the value for that key is true. All right. So then the next one, let me see if I can go back to summary. All right. So the next one is write a validation that requires tasks to have a description at least 5 characters long. So validates description, length, minimum 5. Yep. Length minimum 5. Yeah, this is right as well. And then validation expression. Yeah, that's not right. So I think because that's we're thinking of that as a variable, and then we're setting it to a string, so that actually doesn't validate anything. You have to call this function validates, because that's when you call that function validates, then that tells that model every time somebody calls the save method, do the validation. Right. And then, yeah, any questions on that one?
Why on that third one? Why do you have the little equal and the arrow? How does that work?
So in Ruby, let me open up Cloud9. So in Ruby, if you have a hash, let's look at this hash right there, minimum colon 5, right? So that the hash starts where you have the braces and ends with the close brace. So that's one way of writing the key and then the value. So the key is minimum, the symbol minimum, that's the type of the key. And then the value is the integer 5. Yep. So then another way of doing the exact same thing is by actually writing the symbol minimum and then writing equals greater than, which it looks like an arrow, right? So then we call arrow 5. So that's another way of doing it. So why have 2 ways of doing it? And The reason is because initially in Ruby we only have this way of doing it, minimum error 5, and that's because that's a more general way of doing it. If instead of a symbol, like your key, you want it to be an integer or a string, you can just write that as the key right there. So you can do a quote minimum quote arrow 5, and then the key would be the string minimum. Or you can do 6 arrow 5, and then the key would be the integer 6. But because symbols as the key was used so much in Ruby, and also in JavaScript, that's the syntax. I think that's why people added that syntax later on. But the two are equivalent, right? The minimum colon 5 just means that the key is a symbol. And then let's see if it's open. Right. So if I write a hash, that's minimum colon 5. See that it evaluates to symbol arrow 5. So Ruby automatically converts it for you. Or if I write that, that's now the string. And then, yeah, so does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so then the next one is write a validation for users that requires first name, last name, and email. So validates first name presence true, validates last name presence true, so on. That's correct. And the next one validates first name, last name, email presence true. That's also true, correct. Correct. And then I think then this one is jQuery, right? So this one it's interesting. I'm not sure who did this one, but yeah, okay. So this one is interesting because this I think would work in the browser because it's JavaScript, right? Because it's adding the require attribute to the to the input element.
Did we have true requirement?
What's that?
Did we have true requirement in each of these attributes?
Oh,
Does that make sense?
yeah, because this is the attribute that we're adding, and then this is the value that we're adding. So yeah, so but what we want is we want it to be on like when we're saving to the database, right? And the reason for that is because
So like data validation?
yeah, we want to validate our data, and we may not always have JavaScript available. Like now, probably all browsers is going to have JavaScript available, but then still, you know, for some weird reason, if that doesn't catch the validation, you still want your validation to be available on the server when you actually save the data to the database. And then one last thing is that here we repeated it 3 times, but you can just do it in one, right? So that's the only difference. Any questions on that?
So if you want to do in one whole line, just separate with columns.
With commas, yeah. So here, now think back at these programming constructs. So right here before, in this case, we're calling a method validates, right? And then how many parameters are we passing to validate, to the validates method?
Just one.
Nope.
2.
2.
Oh, because it's symbol.
Yeah, so we're passing 2 parameters. We're passing a symbol and a hash. And then in this one, how many parameters are we passing to the validates method? 4, yeah. So 3 symbols and then 1 hash, right? And so the way the method works is that, like this method, you know, was written by somebody that knows Ruby very well. already know how to do these things. We don't have to know how to do these things. But most programming languages have variable parameters. So there's a way that you can, so far we've only specified parameters for methods, but most languages you have the ability to say, okay, this method can take any number of parameters. So then how this method works is that it probably, and then says, okay, so there's 2 parameters. So then the first one I'm just going to take as the columns. Then it's okay, there's 7 parameters. Okay, the first 6 I'm going to take as the columns, and then the last one is going to be the options. Things. Questions? Any other questions? Okay. So then the last one is write a validation that requires the email for a user to be unique. So class user application or validates email uniqueness true. Uniqueness true. Yep. Presence true. Uniqueness true. Yep. Okay. So the last one is uniqueness is
I use 2 attributes.
you use not well. I would say in this case 2 keys, right? Because this is a hash. So think about it as 2 keys. But yeah. So yeah, this one presence true, is not necessary. The question wasn't asking for it. Yeah, because you can have something that's. I think the way the unique works is that you can have things that are nil, and you have as many as those as you need. But then when something does have a value, then it checks for uniqueness. So any.
Like, there's uniqueness, there's presence, right? No.
Not necessarily. Yeah. So because you can have the nil, which in the database it converts nil in Ruby, converts it to null. So that entry for in the database could be null, which means that it's not there. Right. That's what null means.
Yeah.
And so that can't happen even if you have uniqueness true. One of those rows is going to have nothing in it. So any other questions?
So, like, I was just wondering.
I did have a question too.
Okay.
I wrote in the comments, or sorry, was someone going before me?
You can go ahead now. Yep.
Okay. I wrote in the comments that for the Boolean one, I put the validates complete presence true, but then when I was reading, I saw that it said for Boolean validation, it should be written with the field name, then inclusion, and inside brackets in with that arrow to true or false.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So let's take a look at why that is. So this is like the really weird, kind of like a weirdness of Ruby, not necessarily Rails, but and the reason for that I think is because take a look at like this if statement. So if we have let me define a method check. F check, and then we're passing a, and then if a is true, else puts a is false. Right. So if I call that method with true, then it prints a is true, right? Because obviously it's going to check if a, then puts a, and then so that's what is going to execute that code. If I call it with false, then it prints false. But if I call it with nil, what do you guys think is going to happen?
A is false.
Yeah, a is false, right? And that's because in Ruby, nil is treated as as false. Like whenever you do do a Boolean check on nil, nil is going to look like if it's false. So yeah, and Crystal is right. I didn't even catch that. But so I think what would happen is that if we did validates presence true, then it's always going to make it. I don't know what would happen. So that let's check what would happen. That's the best whenever you're in doubt. Let's check what would happen. So I'm going to go to our to-do app. And then you let's open up. I think we have a complete view. So and then T. Okay, so we have a complete view. So I'm going to open up the models. And then let's add the validation there. Validates, complete, presence. Okay, so then let's start again, and then T equals task that new, and then T that save. Okay, so it didn't save it, so let's look at the errors. Complete can be blank. Okay, so it didn't save it. So let's do T dot complete equals false. T dot save. It didn't save it again, right? So let's look at the error. T dot errors. So it says complete can be blank, right? So that's the problem, is that for some, I think probably the way the function is coded. Maybe it's just checking for is doing an if statement. If the value, then return an error that it can be blank. That's what it might be doing. So you'll only be able to save things when complete is true. So obviously, right, that's not good. So yeah, I mean, you're entirely right, Crystal, and you caught what I missed. So you have to use another validation, which means the validation that Crystal wrote was here. I'll put it in the. I'll put it in the note in the here. So that's validates, and then complete, and then inclusion means that we're only accepting these values, right? We're only accepting the values true and false. So then try that again. T equals task that new, and then T dot complete is false. So T dot save. Now it saves it.
So it has to be inclusion rather than presence.
Then presence, yeah.
Okay. Because it's Boolean.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think under any other case, like if it was a string, for example,
String,
yeah, or an integer, then you use presence. Typically, I mean, I wasn't thinking. I should have thought more carefully about the example that I was giving you, but we didn't have a lot of columns in that table. But typically, with Booleans, what you want is a default value instead of a require. Because then if you have a default value, well, you might need both. But if you have a default value, then you just don't set it, and then the database sets it for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. So any other questions?
Yeah, the one I was going to ask.
Oh yeah.
I was just thinking about like few database, like Oracle database that I was doing before. Is it like when we create table in Oracle, like SQL, like create table and then if it is first name, string, and then data type, like data type is string, and then we give like, or maybe the data string size should be like 25 or something. Is it? I'm just trying to relate that thing with this Rails. We are doing that in database level, and this is different thing. Right?
Yes, that like the database has validations that you can do in the data. So yeah, you can do validations at different points. So you
So
can do it
still
in,
do that in database level, and you have to.
Mhm, yeah.
Do not confine it like.
no, there are different, yeah, there are different levels. Like what happens here is that when you add a validation here and then you call like the save method in Ruby, Ruby checks that the data is correct. And if it's not correct, then it doesn't send an SQL query to the database to insert that. So then the database doesn't receive anything, any information. From the database point of view, Ruby didn't try to insert anything. And then, but if you have the validations in the database, but not in Ruby, then what could happen is that Ruby says, okay, there's no validations to check. Let me send it to the database.
And then so check it.
The database checks it, says, okay, the data is not valid. I'm gonna say return to Ruby and say bad data. I couldn't insert this. And then in Active Record, you're gonna get an error, an exception that's gonna come up, and then it's not gonna save it.
So that sounds like two different validations. Right?
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, validations can happen in the browser with JavaScript. So you can validate with JavaScript. Then they can happen on the server. And that can be, in this case, we're validating with Ruby, Active Record. But if you have another programming language for your server, it could be like Python or something else. And then you can have validations in your database. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, sorry for the confusion about the quiz callbacks. Callbacks. I think, yeah, Crystal was talking about callbacks. So we're gonna get to callbacks later on. But callbacks are basically methods that once you, for example, here's one like before save. That's a callback. What you do is that you define a method, and then you tell Active Record before you actually save the object, call this method. And so it calls that Rails calls that method, and it's going to execute some of your code. And in that code, you could have things like fill in values that users didn't fill in, or something like that. You can have one also that's like after save. So after it's save, then do this. So like, for example, that one could be using an API, like, okay, we saved it to the database. Now we have to send an email, for example, to the user that telling them that we saved it to the database. So yeah, so for next class, we're going to continue our writing our to-do app using. Now that last time we made it so that we can add things to our to-do app in jQuery. And next time we're going to connect it with our API service in Ruby so that we actually save things to a database. All right, and I guess I'll see you on Tuesday then. Thanks for coming.